The second season starts off with a return to basics as Index finds herself kidnapped by a sullen magician while Toma chases them around the city trying to find where they're going. This season didn't premiere too long after the first one, so it's strange that it chose to start off with an episodic adventure that serves very little purpose beyond reintroducing us to some of the characters. Just looking at it from its intention, I think the episode not only accomplishes its goal, but excels at it. This is in large part thanks to irate Toma being his most entertaining depiction, as he is quite frankly fed up with everyone's buffoonery. The antagonist for this episode starts story. Here, what he's trying to do, why he's trying to do it, is made completely clear. What is left up to interpretation is who exactly is the person he's doing it for. Not because we don't see her, but because she never gets a single line, let alone a defined personality. So for all Toma knows, he's going to help this guy cure a cannibalistic cultist. You know what, if that was a revelation that's being saved for a later storyline, I would actually have to give this episode credit for being essential to the series as a whole. As it is now, it's a fine start, but could have been stronger if it fit within the more serialized side of the series. The next arc sees Toma ally himself with Style once more, as both of them team up with the Roman Catholic Church to find and protect one of their members who has the ability to decipher a powerful magical tome. Their mission becomes complicated once they face off against an unexpected enemy. Before anyone mentions it, yes, I know the storyline was foreshadowed both in the Season 1 finale and in the Season 2 premiere. I did not discuss the former or the latter because the writing surrounding it was neither interesting, good, bad, or queer. The storyline also works perfectly without those brief moments in the finale and premiere respectively. Starting off, thank you for finally saying it, and this should have been a line Toma had 15 episodes ago. You truly are a servant of the people, Micah. Also, Style probably shouldn't have heard the conversation, given the fact that he stepped out of the elevator when it was almost over. What's more peculiar is the fact that it looked like a kidnapping, as opposed to simply just waiting for Toma to get back from school, or even asking Index where Toma's school is located at, so we can get him if he really is in a hurry. I'm suspecting time wasn't an issue, given he does still wait for Toma, only instead of at his apartment in an empty building. After finding out who took Index, Toma casually walks to her location, which has him cross paths with the missing nun in question. While she's trying to escape her pursuers, Toma has the gall to assume that she must know Index purely because of how they're dressed. Which is not only an unfair assumption on Toma's part, but particularly religious. Wait. One hilarious misunderstanding. Later, Toma finds himself at the empty building wherein Style thanks him for bringing him the missing nun, only to tell him to get lost. Toma is incensed at Style's ability to be so cold, despite his best efforts to be civil with him. Granted, Toma probably shouldn't have worded his concern in a way that made it seem like he was looking for a reward, but that did lead to a good Style line. As everything balances out in the end. Going on to a non-sardonic aspect to praise, I will say it is interesting to see that despite of their clear differences, and in Style's case barely restrained disdain for him, both he and Toma can still take a moment to stop and talk about normal guy things, like the girls they may like, their dreams for the future, or willingness to inflict brutal death upon anyone who stands in their way. It does help flesh out the characters, by not limiting them to their primary dynamic. Likewise, we get to see more development for the differing magical factions, as each of them prepare for a multi-member conflict. For instance, Ursula, yeah, that. Pursuers, the Akavasi Church, set up a military base as well as a plan to escape, while the Roman Catholic Church come up with their own plans to intercept them. Apparently the world of magic doesn't believe in the concept of guard duties. Not only was Ursula able to escape from her pursuers initially, but even when they managed to get a hold of her once more, she still stumbles into Toma, with the only thing keeping her restricted being a magical binding. I'll give some leeway to the initial escape, since given what we learn about Akamatsu later on, it's possible she wasn't in their custody when she first encountered them, but the second one really does seem like a managerial oversight. After Toma frees her and the two have a brief exchange, he decides to hand over what looks to be a cross to Ursula. On one hand, Style hasn't proven himself to be the most trustworthy person in terms of the information he gives Toma, so I could see him not taking his warning to keep the cross on him at all times seriously. But on the other hand, Style rarely ever seems that concerned talking to Toma, so maybe he should have kept that. Then again, Toma did manage to take down one of the Akamasu members with orange soda and a tackle, so maybe he doesn't have that much to worry about. What sets this arc apart from the previous storylines is that there are three factions at play here, and all of them have reasons not to be trusted by each other or the audience. For the Roman Catholic Church, they appear to just be doing their duty, but we have seen in the previous arc one of their members reveal themselves to not even be human, so who knows if any of the nuns we're seeing currently are hiding equally important secrets. Then there is the Akamatsu Church, who were once allies of Shinzaki, so it withstands the reason they're decent people, Yet at the same time, we've seen examples of former allies of the established characters proving to not be the most emotionally balanced of people if they felt wronged or see their quest as morally just. That's not even taking into account Kanzaki herself and her very literal interpretation of the phrase, beat it into their heads. As for the English Puritan Church, they had one, arguably two, arcs why they're not the most trustworthy organization to associate with. So who he can trust is a conflict entirely separate from the mission Tomo was asked to take part in, and one he can't exactly avoid if he wants to save his life, protect Index, and ensure the safety of Ursula. So, when you've been looking at these episodes with as much attention to detail as I have, you may start to notice a particular trend when it comes to the series' approach to personal dilemmas. In the two arcs where the antagonists were former Guardians of Index, she has no memory of them and is incapable of confronting them over how what they're doing feels like a betrayal. With Makoto's conflict, the people Excella killing are clones. Still lives that had value, as the series demonstrate, but an entirely different issue getting to kill other students who had lives and memories before this experiment began. And I already dedicated 10 minutes explaining the issues in regards to the lack of conflict when it came to Toma coming to terms with Tsuchi Makoto's revelation as a spy. Namely that apparently there wasn't much to come to terms with from Toma's point of view. That's not to say any of these creative choices were poorly thought out or don't serve the functions they're supposed to, but rather their presence speaks to the series wanting to sidestep emotionally complicated conflicts. Situations in which, even if the lead for the arc wins the fight, still can't bring themselves to see it as a victory. So going into the storyline, I did not expect to see Toma damaging any future missions he would have to take with Kanzaki, knowing he battered her friends. Nor did I expect Kanzaki being put in a position where she directly go against said friends, and I very much doubted we were going to see her fight along said friends against Style, Toma, and the rest. Instead, I predicted that the Akamasu Church and Kamijo Kid would learn that they both wanted the same thing, and that them coming to blows was merely a matter of poor communication, while also being able to perfectly communicate said intentions when it's nearly too late to properly resolve the conflict. Suffice to say, my predictions were nearly correct, with what the miscommunication was over being something I couldn't see coming. Roman Catholic Church also lose any ability to be surreptitious with their intentions when Toma starts questioning things, leading to this expression. Given what happened to the last person who tried giving off a bloodthirsty persona, my reaction was more akin to
oh, look at her, she's adorable.
One escape later, and Toma rushes to go and save Ursula from her former sisters. It's a good thing they informed him about a church named after her that was nearby in the area. It's also fortunate that magicians have never heard of guards stationed outside, even when they have defenses they believe shouldn't be able to get past. I guess witnessing a good nun stomping was just too enticing for any one of them to pass up. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to bring up the main nun's motivation. Basically, she and the rest of her covenant find the possibility that of anyone being able to decipher this storyline-specific tome too dangerous. So they set up a plan to kill her that would also involve excommunicating her, allowing them to still abide by their doctrine. This seems to be an order from the Superior rather than something they decided independently, but only time will tell. Just as it told Sile, now was the time for the second dramatic entrance to come and help save Ursula. His in-universe reasoning being the cross Toma decided to give her, explaining that now she's under the English Puritans Church protection. I doubt she could properly be considered a member because of something a non-Christian did unknowingly, but it's all pretense anyway, so make of it what you will. More importantly, the Akamasu make their own dramatic entrance, looking to help Toma and Style. So now a fight breaks out with characters new and old getting to show off their skills as Kanzaki looks on approvingly, seeing all her allies come together, fighting for a righteous cause. Also, did Style adjust the settings on his pyrokinesis? Supposed to assume that this church is going to be littered with a bunch of charred corpses by the end of it. In the midst of the battle, the Kamijo kids discovered that Ursula was in fact not able to decipher this ancient tome, as it was instead designed specifically to incorrectly understood by those who tried learning its secrets. That could possibly be beneficial information later on, but doesn't really help them in their current situation. Instead, they devise a plan that requires Toma to distract the head nun, Ignace. Or Ignace? Or Ignace. We get to see another relatively unique ability that the antagonist explains for the audience's sake rather than having any legitimate reason to tell it to Toma. We also learn more about her worldview, which would have been beneficial in terms of making her come across as a compelling antagonist if this was hinted at or explored earlier within the arc. Now yes, that can be countered by saying if they did anything of the sort, and that would spoil the reveal, but as I already mentioned before, said reveal was pretty much already spoiled by virtue of how the series handles conflict. This choice to have a twist ends up having the overall effect of making all the nuns introduced in this arc significantly less interesting purely because they have to be so unassuming in what they're doing. Even extends to Ursula, who I was debating whether or not to even call her by her name, considering she mostly just an incredibly kind and generous person, which isn't really a personality so much as it is a single trait that she remains displaying throughout the entire arc. Really, the only reason I decided to use her actual name is because of the plot point of her deciding to try to decipher the book so she can learn how to destroy it. Something that still keeps within the established virtuous nature of her character, while still showing that she maybe is a little bit more ambitious than your typical saintly figures that you would see in a story. Like, to close things off, their plan is a success, and everyone comes out alive and safe. Possibly. We see Kanzaki try to inform Toma concerning the aftermath of the battle. Also, finds herself struggling to think of a way to properly repay Toma for everything he's done for her and her friends. In the midst of her embarrassment and Tsuchi Mikado's attempt to introduce a whole new fetish to the show, she finally realizes that Toma is in fact a nice guy like that. The final significant scene is between Pip and Style, as she finally divulges her motivation when it came to this specific mission.
That's the same word.
I said it nicer the second time.
This arc leaves me in an interesting place, as there is a disappointing level of predictability when it comes to the twist. Yeah, I'm not sure I should fully fault the series for that, as most people aren't making an analysis that stretches past an hour, so they're unlikely to take into consideration everything I have leading up to this story arc. Still comes up to being an enjoyable storyline. We take the focus off of Toma once more to instead focus on Makoto's roommate, Kuroko. As she goes about performing her duties as a member of Judgment, she meets someone else with not only similar abilities, but who also has seemingly caught the attention of Makoto, making her a person of interest. It is surprising that instead of having Makoto be the focus of this arc, they instead give that responsibility to her roommate, with her serving more the role of a plot device. For those who haven't realized it by now, Kuroko has an unhealthy attraction to Makoto. Not in terms of it being romantic, but rather in terms of her operating under prison rules when it comes to both of them taking a shower. If she was just an absurd side character, that really wouldn't be worth mentioning, but she is supposed to be Makoto's best friend. So looking past it as a joke becomes a challenge when so much of said joke takes up their screen time whenever the two interact. So it's never really made clear what the friendship is like beyond they care about each other, and, well, you said we're friends, so that's basically the same as consent. Now to be clear, I can enjoy lapdog characters. In fact, some of my best friends are canine servants. But what makes those stories entertaining, as well as compelling, is the fact that the series acknowledges the subservient nature character in question, as well as taking the time to demonstrate their master's personality based on how they treat them. Kuroko the story is quick to make fun of her behavior, but never really hold it to any type of serious scrutiny, nor does it have Makoto acknowledge it beyond it being substantially creepy. Which it is, to be fair, but it seems like she's missing the whole unclear idol worship that's going on between Kuroko and her. She's not focusing on Makoto. She doesn't have too many distinct aspects to her personality that would set her apart from your typical lead in a police story. Her joke questions up having a string on her character rather than being a detail carefully woven into her personality. The antagonist of this brief story feels like an improvement from what we've seen so far in the season, as not only does her goal tie back into a previous plotline series, but her reasoning and personality strikes a good balance between being clearly in the wrong yet entertaining, while also managing to still have some credence to her grievances. Her quality does waver a bit as she performs a well-charted classic. Why are you explaining this? They don't really need to know. Do you like hearing your own voice? Don't waste time and just go. And later attempts to corrupt Kuroko feels unwarranted given the fact that she doesn't know what the latter wants, so it seems as if it's a bit too presumptuous to think offering her the same thing she's after would suffice, making the scene feel like it's more trying to hit a trope holder rather than being a necessary piece of dialogue between characters. Like the other mini arcs before it, this storyline finds relevancy in setting up future smaller plot points that will grow to be something more as the series goes on, such as the antagonistic teleporter herself or Accelerator now needing assistance to help her perform his calculations for his vector control. Comparing the three mini storylines, I find this to be better than the fake boyfriend episode, as it does give serious attention to the lead for this plot, but not as compelling when compared to Accelerator's episodes, as we don't get the level of insight there for Kuroko. Also, there's a scene like this.
don't even know how that happened.
Play the part of Oracle briefly. I doubt we'll be getting another episode like this in the near future that gives some focus to Kuroko. So, for anyone who might have found her entertaining in the earlier episodes, this is going to be an especially welcome treat for you. At least I can give this episode props for not having an unhealthy obsession with a singular person be given to a character already well established for being a prideful figure, who shouldn't be so reliant on the approval of others. When background becomes foreground, the Daihase Festival is a special event in which students are able to showcase the mastery of their own abilities that doesn't involve just a little bit of aiming, as well as them getting the chance to see their families again in a city-sanctioned public event. Certainly, not everyone uses this as a time to relax, as two members of the Roman Catholic Church take this opportunity wearing the city's defenses all over and enact a plan that will affect all the current denizens of Academy City. Toma getting caught in the mix. For the first time since the early episodes of Season 1, encapsulating what is so intriguing about the series to me, and the competitive nature of many of the events, competition between Toma and Makoto, does frame it a bit more on the lines of a tournament. With even the added layer of there being a hidden scheme taking place, most of the competitors notice. It actually diverges from your typical tournament arc is how an Oriana Thompson posed as a teacher, or student, she avoids the competition altogether. This leaves the festival as a backdrop to what is, for the most part, a citywide chase. With Toma, Style, and Tsuchimikado having to deal with the literal obstacles she leaves behind, as well as them needing to get past the people who are unaware of what's truly going on as they need to behave in a more inconspicuous manner. Some of them are easy to get past, like Toma's classmate, who is more concerned about making sure the games go smoothly, such as making it easier for him to slip away and focus on finding Oriana. He's also asked by Tsuchimikado to keep this a secret from Index, as he believes if she got involved, that would attract the attention of every magician in the world looking to tap into the vast knowledge stored within her head. Given the last arc had Index openly interact with the Roman Catholic Church, and Oriana as well as her benefactor are associated with that church, the logic behind that reasoning isn't particularly strong. Much in the same way Toma didn't have much of a reason to restate what he just heard. Moving past that, the teen trio struggles with physically keeping up with her, as unlike the previous magicians they faced, she clearly seems to take great care into keeping her body in a physically fit condition, with tracking her through magic proving to be equally, if not more difficult, thanks to her own skills as a sorcerer. Also, not using sorcerer interchangeably with the word magician. Those are two clearly different separate categories to users of the mystic arts. This can be seen in how the tracking spell used to find her was easily disrupted and backfired on Style, forcing him to use a different spell that could very well put his life on the line. A possibility that briefly puts Toma at odds with Tsuchimikado, for some reason. Of course, we've already established he is, in fact, a nice guy like that, so I don't expect him to be indifferent towards Style's suffering. But they risk their lives on missions like these nearly all the time, and Style himself was more than willing to cooperate knowing the risk, so it does seem odd that Toma is so strongly against this plan being enacted. Come to think of it, why did they choose to use either spell rather than tracking her to her mana, as the first arc clearly established was a possibility? Maybe that's what the first spell was meant to represent, but the way they described it sounds as if they were pinpointing her literal physical location. There is a possibility that she has the skill to suppress her mana, making it impossible for them to track her that way, but if she was so forward-thinking, it would seem like it would be beneficial to actually change her appearance as well, that way she could more easily blend in with the populace of Academy City. Maybe that's a technique only those of the English Puritan Church are aware of, but if that is what's supposed to be represented, you think Toma would still ask that question, since he himself wouldn't be aware of that. That also raises the question of why Style and Kanzaki didn't use their ability to change their own appearances, making it easier for them to
Enough, okay? Quit with the rambling mad scientist act and give me some answers!
So Toma is able to get his point across calmly to a girl, without the situation being life-threatening or him going but is unable to tell Makoto to step away from that pole in a way that doesn't reveal there's a dangerous magic tag placed upon it. Maybe its speaking abilities are proximity based. Either way, his and Tsuchimikado's efforts to make sure that no civilians were hurt proves to be a failure, as Toma's aforementioned classmate ends up touching said pole and getting hospitalized. Seeing how far the sorceress is willing to go enrages Toma, so he now sees their fight as a personal one, with him dispelling her attacks and quickly knocking her to the ground. Seems a bit restrained given how angry he was, as well as careless given the fact that he turns his back on her to check on an immobilized Tsuchimikado without even making sure she's at bare minimum unconscious. Naturally, she manages to get away, and what should have been a Pyrrhic victory turns into a string of reveals, as they learn not only was she carrying a random sign, rather than the saint-killing item they were chasing her for, but they're told that the item they were chasing her after never existed in the first place, and was instead simply a smokescreen for a true artifact, St. Peter's Cross, that when planted will turn any land it's in into the domain of the Roman Catholic Church. This comes with the effect of brainwashing any person within said land Realizing just how much greater the stakes are, our three leads decide to take a lunch break. You can't exactly save lives on an empty stomach. Toma meets up with his parents, who themselves have met up with Makoto's mother, leading to a barrage of jokes you expect with this type of cross-family get-together. After a minute or so, Toma gets back on the clock since obviously there's no time for a lunch break with people's own volition at stake. This time, Tsuchimikado takes on the tracking task, which goes about as well for him as it did Style. Slight difference being Oriana deciding to take a more hands-on approach when it came to dealing with him. Fortunately, Toma realizes the bizarre movement patterns of Oriana, considering she doesn't have St. Peter's Cross on her, and gets his acquaintances to pull together the information to predict where she's going next. They manage to get back on her trail, but are once again distracted, this time by a nearly fatal event. So let's take attempted child murder to talk about the sorceress, or sorcerer. Let's talk about Oriana. As far as antagonists go, she excels at nearly every level. Starting off with her appearance, she is clearly designed in a way to play into the whole femme fatale archetype, while her actual attempts to be sensual come across like a middle schooler who's never had to flirt with someone in their entire life. Better by the fact that the people she's dealing with are in the demographic where they should be giving more of a response than, as opposed to the bare minimum they're giving her in the actual story. While each of them could be given a reason for their focused demeanor that fits well within their established character, it could also just be said that bad at what she considers to be flirting, that none of them are really even registering what she's saying. It gets to the point where I'm expecting her to bust out,
"Well, Flash, once again, it looks like you're the bottom, and I'm the top."
Moving on to her more thought-out details, her abilities manage to undermine the strengths of each of the three leads for this arc. She has a variety of spells she can use quickly, so even if Tsuchimikado is very careful in when he decides to use magic, that still doesn't guarantee he'll stop all of her attacks. She's more adept in both her utilization and potentially knowledge of the mystic arts, therefore making Style could throw at her something she quickly adapts to. And as stated before, she's both physically fit and seems to be a rather capable fighter, so even if Toma dispels every magical attack she has, the fight's still going to be a hard one fought. It's done in a way that neither makes her seem unreasonably powerful, or makes every encounter with her come across as hilariously one-sided. She's also able to have sympathetic moments that don't require her to cry about how she's doing all this because when she was a little girl, her father got ran over by a scientist. These episodes just show her to be an amicable person when she's not fighting, and even have a remark about how she never intended to hurt any bystander in a serious capacity. Despite all this, she's still willing to look at innocent people being hurt as acceptable losses, so it doesn't feel like the storyline is overplaying its hand in regards to making her seem like a redeemable person. She also stands out by treating it was just another job rather than a solemn duty she must undertake, or proof of her superiority as a person. She does briefly bring up how what she's doing is going to make everyone in Academy City a much happier person, but it's quietly to herself or in a bid to somewhat convince Toma, as opposed to having a mental breakdown. This circles back to the whole child bursting fiasco, which represents her one negative trait. Really a problem for the reasons you may think. It is explained that she did initially think Himagami was part of Necessarius due to the cross she was wearing, and was likely more on guard than she normally is thanks to Tsuchimikado's bluff about there being agents here all across the city, with him even threatening to call Kandaraki. Taking all that to account, it still comes across as strangely impulsive for her to immediately jump to murder. For a girl who, just going off of her initial reaction alone, it could be seen that she wasn't actually looking for Oriana in the first place, and is therefore likely not an agent of the English Puritan Church. Especially for someone like Oriana, who's been shown to be fairly level-headed throughout this arc. Even if what I said was too much of an unreasonable leap for her to make, it still doesn't make much sense for her to immediately try attack a member of Necessarius, as not only are there witnesses around, but doing so would likely draw the attention of other agents, which she obviously is trying to avoid. The issue isn't the action itself, but rather that the character taking it really doesn't seem like the type to act in such an impulsive manner. It would make more sense for her to hurt Himagami with the understanding that the Toma and Style were close by, and seeing an innocent person hurt would likely serve as another distraction. It could be argued that her doing something of the sort would also be out of character, yet at the same time, she's clearly established as someone who is more than willing to bite off damage and the significant harm done to bystanders. It would fit well within her character to go this route. Aside from that, and her apparently operating on the same honor system as Toma when it comes to letting their enemy get back up on their feet, the writing for her is impeccable. The final confrontation happens at an airport in which Tsuchimikado is once again taken out of commission, leaving it to Style and Toma to handle Oriana. Once again, they manage to gain the upper hand on an enemy through working together, but this time it appears to be far more unintentional, with her dual fisting not being enough to stop her, and Style quickly falling to her own surprise attack. It all comes down to an exchange of punches, be it through the power flashback, her guard being down, or Oriana being exhausted. Everything she's experienced that day, Toma finally manages to knock her down for good. With his constantly building anger thanks to his allies and friends being hurt throughout this arc, I expected his final hit to result less in a ballerina spin and more in... Even with Oriana defeated, her superior still has everything in place in order to take over Academy City. Toma makes his final play of the night as he gets the fireworks to go off right before the effects of the cross begin taking place, the former blocking the needed starlight for the latter in order for the ritual to take full effect. Given the requirements for this spell, she won't be casting it again anytime soon. Her attempts to flee being thwarted by Pip, who shows just how she likes to educate people who made the tragic mistake of standing against her. I would have gone over the personality for the mastermind behind this plan, or even mention her by name, but Pip pretty much sums her up in a way that's far more succinct than I ever could. Also because we barely see her throughout the storyline, so her actual name isn't particularly necessary for you to understand what's going on. With the city being able to continue as it was, Toma finds himself exactly where he belongs, in the hospital. There he has to deal with Index's frustration, stemming from him keeping secrets from her in regards to this mission, which brings me to this arc's biggest hindrance when it comes to being both entertaining and compelling. Throughout this storyline, Index has implied and just outright stated how much she wants to spend time with Toma during the festival. She used just to have Toma pay for the variety of foods she sees at the festival. But it becomes clear rather quickly that she legitimately does want to just spend the day with him, and feels hurt and disappointed that he seems to have something more important he needs to do. A sweet sentiment that is portrayed in an aggravatingly whining way. The manner in which she demands his attention during this arc gives off the impression that every single day he goes to school, she spends 5 minutes screaming about how he doesn't really care about her. To be both charitable and constructive, I'll say that any feelings of abandonment she could have would worsen by Toma not actually explaining what it is he's going to do rather than taking the time to enjoy the festival with her. It's also important to take into account that she doesn't remember her past beyond the current year. So from her perspective, this will be the first major holiday she gets to spend with someone she cares about. But taking all of that into consideration, it is transparently clear that the festival is at minimum bi-yearly event. Something I was able to figure out, well, my only interaction with Academy City being through a computer screen. So, as a person who actually lives in the city, it shouldn't take her too long to recognize this fact and understand she'll have plenty more opportunities to enjoy this festival with Toma. Extended a further olive branch by assuming that she fears there might not be a next time, given her aforementioned memory loss. Anyone with functioning eyes and some semblance of emotional intelligence can tell he's clearly struggling and is worried about something, even if they met him just for that particular day. She lives with him, so I doubt it would take much in the way of mental gymnastics to understand whatever he's getting up to, it's clearly something that matters to him, and whatever she wants to do can be put on hold until he's finished. Her being understanding in this moment, showing just how close they've actually become. Even if they wanted to write her as emotionally immature, her just being sullen and borderline non-responsive would have gotten the point across equally as well as her being demanding and petulant. Also being funny in its own right. This is Index at her worst, the character regressing to a 6-year-old who lacks emotional permanence. Going back to what I would say is the well-written aspect of this arc is the dynamic between the three male leads. Each of them having a skill the other two lacks, thus making no one feel unnecessary. Them filling the comedic roles of the deadpan, the straight man, and the date man. Getting to see Tsuchimikado carry himself in a professional manner when dealing with Style, showing he's able to adjust his personality to best suit whoever he's partnering with. Style showing once more why he is the best character of the franchise, as he gets me to legitimately laugh at the many teachers' routines simply by not playing along with it. And Toma himself showing just how accustomed he's gotten to these missions, also to a lesser degree, that's fully coming to his own rather than continuously living in the shadow of the boy he used to be. This arc has skyrocketed my interest back to where it initially was when starting the series, And the only issues I can bring up are more on the subjective side and don't receive too much focus, not detract away from all of the positive aspects of the storyline. Compelling antagonists, engaging leads, interesting execution. A story I enjoyed, and I'll enjoy watching again. After a series of less than friendly greetings from the girls' life, Toma actually gets a sign of good luck with him winning a trip to Venice in the raffle. Yet, once he gets there, he finds himself yet again caught in someone else's problem. That quickly becomes something more personal for him as the episodes go on. This arc effectively acts as a sequel to Roman Catholic and Akamatsu conflict, as both factions make a reappearance during this storyline. Well, not the first time this series had to deal with a storyline past its initial conflict. This arc in particular has the benefit of working with practically a whole cast of characters. So even if one character doesn't particularly interest you, you have another character there to act as a point of engagement. Despite what I said in the pastiche of a synopsis, it's unlikely Toma just so happened to win a trip to Italy right near the time Orsola was targeted for an assassination and the Roman Catholic Church were preparing an entire fleet of magical ships. Still, unlike other missions beforehand, no one actually steps forward and explains to Toma what he's expected to do once he arrives. Ends without it being revealed if it was true, a deliberate scheme or a chance encounter. Something that does hold a bit more relevancy is us learning, more about Orsola as a person, with it being revealed that she in fact has lived in Venice most of her time with the Roman Catholic Church. And for those of you who are wondering why I didn't mention her, or Shirley, by name when it came to the last storyline, the role each of them played could have been filled by nameless background nuns, so it really is worth acknowledging their return. Speaking of scenes I normally wouldn't talk about, there have been several moments throughout the past season and this season wherein Toma has been caught in hilarious hijinks that involve him accidentally getting more or less an eyeful of a girl when she least expected it. I have glossed over most of those occasions, seeing as how I didn't want to come across as redundant, and it felt rather fruitless to become critical of a scene that is ultimately designed for comedy. So it didn't really seem like there would be much of an informative way for me to essentially describe a scene as not particularly funny to me. Yet, when you have Toma acknowledge what he should have done, being slower when it comes to processing information when compared to the average person, seems less like a snarky joke I keep making, and more like it's actually an official and essential part of his character. This gets compounded on by Toma being fast enough to block against literal electrical bolts, yet somehow being too slow in his reaction time to defend against a combo attack of a small little girl. Said lightspeed double punch being delivered by Ignaze, who has been assigned to the Queen of the Adriatic the Queen of the Adriatic Sea, along with her companions after their failure with Orsola before. Worried about her two friends, Ignaze asks Toma and Orsola to go save them in exchange for her looking the other way while they escape. Granted, it's not the best negotiation / blackmail tactic to give the person what they want before you get what you want, especially when you don't really have anything told over their head. But then again, given the two people too, they likely were going to save the other two, regardless what wasn't being threatened to be done to them. On watching this part, and instead just listening to it, you're probably going to be confused with a lot of the thems and does and they. So, to do a bit more clarification, let's talk about the three former antagonist nuns turned victims: Ignaze, Lucia, and Angeline. I care nothing for them. The basic goal behind creating a character is to make them feel as if they're unique representations of the work as a whole. Even when they're based off of well-established archetypes, a writer still seeks to make them their own by personal touch through the setting itself. Where my invested for those three nuns is lost is the fact that said personal touch is so skin deep. Yes, they have a backstory, but it's incredibly bland. Yes, at least one of them have a clear ideology, but it's the most basic religious extremist view you could give. Yes, they all clearly have a close friendship, but I struggle to say anything about it because the show struggles to show them together for more than 2 minutes. It's to the point where it feels like they could be placed in any setting, not because they're so well-rounded that they play off of nearly any personality type, but instead because they're so simplistic that you'd have to change very little about them to make sense in any setting of your choosing. The same could be said for the antagonist, with the only noteworthy thing about him being his ability. I've never presumed that my own ratings of each storyline would dictate anyone's view of them moving forward, or if they decide to experience the series for themselves. This is the first time where I can say that even the information I'm relaying might not be reliable, just because I'm so detached from what's going on. How little I care about the main focal characters of this story. The two most interesting parts of this arc for me is the fact that the Queen of the Adriatic Sea not only erase the physical location of a place, but also any records, details, and memories. This series' style of conflict resolution, it's clear that was ever going to actually be used within this storyline, if at all in any future one. The second is Toma finally starting to build up a reputation for himself. On a less favorable note, this results in him no longer being an anomaly magical side has not taken account for, but instead a legitimate potential threat that warrants powerful magicians being sent after him in order to make sure he no longer interferes with any future plans of any faction, church or otherwise. You should probably watch the arc for yourself, but this time I'm saying it in regards to actually getting to find out any crucial piece of information I may have missed, because honestly, even just remembering anything that happened outside of the final point I talked about and the initial point I talked about isn't a chore in and of itself. Major conflict of this season sees the tension built up throughout the 24 episodes come to a head, be it between characters, their own undesired past, factions, interests, or even just conflicting interests. Regardless of the Academy City and the world at large are going to be looking at a battle the likes of which no one has seen until this point. Starting with Toma, this appears to be the first time he's ever been shown as happy. Sure, we've seen a smile here or there, but that's only undermined by the situation he's currently in, or it's done in a way that's clearly meant to reassure whoever he is with. Here, instead, happiness genuinely stems from just getting to mess around with his friends. It's an inconsequential, but ultimately welcome difference for his character, as normally he has the expression of Eeyore with the energy of Tigger. While I still believe Toma at the beginning of the season at his most entertaining, what I'm briefly seeing here is still something I would more than welcome to have be implemented into his character from here on out.
Nick, I want you to smile more. You know, look at those frown lines. Take a vacation, lighten up.
This arc also sees the return of Accelerator, as it sees him moving in with the scientist associate, the policewoman. Okay, her name is Yomikawa, but that little speech the scientist gave in her initial appearance guarantees I won't actually refer to her by name. Thanks to the outcome of his last solo adventure, he also finds himself sharing his new home with the likes of Last Order. And possibly the scientist? It's not really made clear she's the new experimental foster family. Also, if you're actually watching this rather than listening, you might think the state of her apartment suggests Yumikawa does get decent pay, but given what's actually said about how she's able to afford it, I'm still sticking to the assumption that both of her jobs give her suboptimal pay. Once they start to actually settle in, both Accelerator and Last Order feel the need to unwind a bit by taking a shower, leading to, for me, going seasons episode by episode, give off the impression that when it comes to this show's penchant for cheese cupcakes, plays into the impression of this series being satirical, intentionally or otherwise. The idea of the show working as a satire came to me as I looked at Index as a character and saw that, despite being initially introduced as a damsel in distress, she lacks a lot of the more desirable traits found in your typical female character who plays that role, even within the confines of her own series. She was more or less designed in a way to be a type by making it very clear the only people who would be interested in protecting her are those who sincerely care about her as an individual, or someone who has their own ambitions that require the information stored within their head. To keep this semi-tangent from turning to full-blown rambling, I'll circle back by stating that Accelerator and the two women carefully assessing the situation opens up the possibility that whenever the series does bring in the tired, even for the time, joke of a character stumbling onto another character half-dressed, it is instead meant to be making fun of those two characters' immaturity. For the girls, their insecurity in their bodies overriding any common sense to properly look at the situation for what it is, and for the guys, being so concerned with their image, they freak out trying to look like they didn't do anything wrong as opposed to just simply stating the facts of the situation. Granted, there are some contradictions in this interpretation of the series, but Still, it makes the jokes that do constantly pop up seem less tedious, as well as provides an interesting view of another character that I'll be discussing in Season 3. Back to your regularly scheduled hijinks, Toma finds himself having to deal with placating Mikoto after losing their wager during the Hase Festival. Oh yeah, they had a wager. I didn't mention it when discussing that arc because it just didn't particularly catch my eye. This mostly consists of getting Toma to spend some time with her without having to exactly be open with her feelings. This was as if it is the best time to discuss what I mean when I previously mentioned that Makoto's feelings aren't exactly woven into her character. Romance in fiction is a lot like exposition. On average, you simply have the necessary information directly conveyed to the characters and by extension the audience. What writers typically avoid is having scenarios in which the information given clashes with the context of the scene and or with the characters involved. Ideally, what a story strives to do is to deliver that exposition, but it's presented in a way to where it complements the other focus of the scene rather than being the sole reason said scene exists. For example, Style and Pip's bathtub scene. It clearly communicates she's an untrustworthy person who likes to keep her motivation hidden from her subordinates, yet it does so well her actively being cryptic, nor flat out telling Style that any information he needs to know she will convey to him at her own leisure. It focuses on the whole comedic wet clothes gag and allows the characterization I just mentioned for Pip to be picked up on by anyone who is paying close attention to the scene. And even if they missed it the first time, they'll likely recognize more of what was going on there when that information directly comes up in the future. Equivalent for Makoto, that would simply just be her helping Toma in a way that doesn't overtly tie back into any sort of desire for them to be together. So when I say Makoto's, and to a greater extent Kuroko's, aren't carefully woven into the characters, I mean that they're not presented in a way that communicates that they have feelings for someone in a manner that adds to anything else occurring in the scene, but rather that the show will stop dead in its tracks just so it can effectively look you in the eye and tell you who they have a romantic interest in. The real problem comes from the fact that whereas exposition is necessary information to help audience better understand what is happening in any given plot, romance doesn't always play such a crucial role in any story that is not the primary focus. Such as with Makoto, wherein I can't name any plot point or moment of development that requires her specifically to see Toma as anything more than a friend. Still, that is forgivable if her feelings were rooted in traits and actions unique to her character. As Index herself ended up pointing out at the end of Season 1, Toma involving himself in someone else's problem and helping them find a solution is something that he does for multiple girls. So the end result is a story immediately reminding us of an aspect to her character that is arguably superfluous. Anyone who's watched the show may enjoy that, regardless of its necessity, but again I ask, can you really call it a necessary element of her character? What is a tad more plot crucial is the convergence of several characters within the mall for Academy City. One of Makoto's clones, and what their lives are like now that they no longer have to deal with the brutal experiments. Last Order, who wound up getting locked outside of her new home, something that only seems to bother Accelerate, whereas her guardian is completely unperturbed by one of her charges wandering the city, especially when said charge is in fact a little girl. Still, she does bother to put in some effort in locating her, so I guess I can't fully fault her in terms of being a neglectful parental figure. Also, Index meets up with some of the other characters due to food-related reasons. This produces a well-written scene wherein Yomikawa tries to reach out to Accelerator emotionally by relating to him through her own troubled experiences that she doesn't completely divulge, as well as promises she made for the future in regards to how she wanted to live her life. Granted, I doubt said promises will be able to be fully maintained, but it's the thought that counts. We also get what could be considered the funniest joke in the entire series, which is later followed up by said series playing with character perception, as we're made to believe Toma and Accelerator can't see each other, despite being able to see Index and Last Order being able to see their respective sad boys. Quick aside, apparently photographic memory doesn't help you in recognizing resembling appearances, as Index is unable to tell that the little clone of Makoto has the near exact same face as Makoto. Now that all those teenage shenanigans are out the way, I can fully sink my teeth into the meat of this arc, which is the one-woman invasion headed up by Vento of the Front, whereas Accelerator has his own hands full dealing with a personal threat that takes the form of his own past demons. Going back to Vento, she feels like a proper escalation of all the previous antagonists that preceded her. Not necessarily because of her strength, but instead because her mission this time around is directly the death of Toma, which makes him more of a legitimate threat in the eyes of the magical society as a whole, while also obviously putting his life in danger to a great extent. Not to mention the way she goes about achieving her secondary goal, the mass devastation of Academy City, is through a spell that frankly can't be ignored by most of the denizens. It can also be said that this serves as an escalation for Alistair, since rather than simply pointing Toma at the problem, or even getting one of his many underlings to handle it, he instead enacts a plan we've already seen him working on previously, as he brings back Hyoka to form a city-wide aim field that's able to cause physical damage to Vento the front as she uses her magic as if she were an Esper. This both emphasizes the fact that Alistair is someone with various plans contingent on his main objective going poorly due to unforeseen variables, but also that he has extensive knowledge of both sides, hinting at a potential past that we could see explored in the future. Where Vento falters as an antagonist is that she feels like another strongman villain. This time around, not even coming from a particular grudge against Academy City, but rather her own negative history with science involving an accident that took the life of her younger brother. Spoiler alert, it's not even like a direct harmful act by any sort of scientist, it's just they couldn't save her brother after a horrible roller coaster incident. Still, the negatives don't outweigh the positive, and I find her to be a welcome addition to the rogues gallery that Toma has to face in each respective arc. For Accelerator's conflict, he faces off against Kihara, one of the main scientists responsible for helping him develop his particular Esper ability. Thanks to that role, Kihara has the means and knowledge to exploit Accelerator's vector manipulation and find gaps within his defenses to, let's just say, beat him like he stole something, you know. While denying it openly, being physically beaten while getting his beliefs and, frankly, mental stability trampled on by what is a former mentor forces Accelerator to fully face down his former negative traits that now put him at a crossroad, where either he can stick by the negative traits and ideology that was beaten into him as a child, hoping to defeat Kihara at his own gain, or discover a different way to utilize his abilities that comes with far greater risk and less of a guarantee of success, but at the same time still makes it to where he can actually have a future with Last Order, well, either one of them losing their lives or the lives they wish to live. Kihara is, if not one-dimensional, then very much within that territory. I say that more as an observation rather than a detraction from his character, but what I will say lessens his presence is the fact that his existence wasn't foreshadowed at all up until this point. Now, on one hand, we're given an in-universe reason why Accelerator wouldn't really think about him, the previous appearances he's had so far, but at the same time, we don't really need Accelerator to establish the existence of a particular scientist that both helped Accelerator master his abilities while also giving him a very unhealthy mindset when it came to how to approach obstacles in life. While I want to say this is the more interesting aspect of this arc, given the personal drama that it's built on, what keeps me from doing so is the contrivances littered throughout. Some of it is forgivable, like Kihara not throwing Accelerator out the window during their final encounter, since he's in line with his characterization. Other parts have me asking scientific questions, such as, and then there's Index, whose personality is fine within this arc, but somehow manages to find Accelerator after their initial parting, despite the fact that he had a very clear head start. She didn't know where he was going, and the reason she wants to find him is so trivial and ridiculous that Toma all but has to sabotage himself when it comes to explaining why she doesn't need to return a certain item. The third meetup is a bit more believable as Index was already tracking Hyoka, so it would make sense that she could potentially stumble across Last Order since they're currently connected to not necessarily complicated, but not all that interesting scientific details as the series defines it. It just comes across like her role in this storyline was written backwards, wherein they knew where they wanted her to end up and how she would help Accelerator solve his main conflict, but the writer wasn't really sure how exactly she would get there. Moving past that, thanks to the involvement of several main characters, Academy City gets to live on another day as most of the denizens survived this particular invasion. Still, a water-themed asterisk should be put next to that, since the arrival of Vento's colleague, Aqua, indicates to both Toma and the audience that this particular conflict is far from over. This arc feels like a massive step up from the previous season's finale, as it not only pays off several ideas and particular character arcs that were set up throughout the previous 20 or so episodes, but at the same time, it also leaves you more curious than ever in regards to the alliances, history, and motives concerning several magical, even some scientific figures. The problems with it aren't easily ignored, but at the same time don't greatly hinder it, so I would say that this is very much a step in the right direction as far as the series writing is concerned. While these next two episodes technically finish off the season, I don't really consider it the finale, considering the conflict they introduce is mostly contained within them, with only some side effects and a particular character having any real relevance after that. Instead, I consider an epilogue. With the invasion now being finished and characters questioning what their next move is going to be, a string of crimes is committed by the group known as Scale Out, who wish to improve the lives for Level Zeros all across Academy City, regardless of what actions they need to take. Sure enough, both Toma and Accelerator find themselves involved again, with Incident helping them realize what exactly they want to do with their upcoming future. Accelerator joining what is essentially a Black Ops group sounds like a very fascinating concept, as it requires him to reel back both his incredible power as well as his seemingly uncontrollable nature, which can be considered the two main defining aspects of Accelerator, debatably. When looking at his teammates, the lineup is rather interesting, since most of them, well, technically all of them, are characters we've met before, but instead where I find the potential for compelling storytelling stems from how they would likely interact given their respective personalities. Shichi Mikado potentially could take the edge off of Accelerator's personality, less due to his comedic antics, but rather because clearly underneath those is a darker, troubled teenager who still manages to find joy in everyday activities, serving as an example of what Accelerator could be down the line. We have the Aztec Magician and Shichi Mikado, who are both spies, yet go about it in different ways, which could serve as the basis for unique disagreements down the line. Said Aztec Magician normally carries himself with an air of civility and shallow charisma, which could serve as a source of irritation for Accelerator given his own default demeanor. Awaki and Accelerator could see each other as kindred spirits, giving the various similarities the two have, and a delinquent girl and a gentleman spy is always good for entertainment value, as far as interactions are concerned. Regardless of who interacts with who, each character relationship has the clear potential to be a captivating element of whatever arc they appear in. On Toma's end, it mostly just involves him getting up to the same teenage hijinks that he normally is participating in, with the main difference being his decision to prepare for the future comes in the form of wanting to study other languages so he can be better prepared when he has to interact with any given foreigner. I had my own ideas for what exactly he was going to say before that hilarious reveal, and I'm curious if Shichi Mikado's ideas line up with said theory. This time around, Accelerator finds himself to be the one initially engaged with the main conflict of the arc, I guess, as both he and Kawaki are sent out on their first mission by dealing with the members of Scale Out, whereas he primarily deals with the leader. She is involved disrupting their current mission objective at that point. Said leader proves to be a somewhat dangerous adversary thanks to his own resourcefulness and ability to recognize the potential flaws in Accelerator's vector control. He still manages to pull through, Accelerator not the leader, thanks to his own keen mind, yet that does raise the question how Accelerator is so resourceful when it comes to his abilities being interrupted, when as far as we can tell he's almost always relied on them in particular to handle any combative situation. I mean, it's possible he was trained to improvise as a kid, if not after his fight with Toma, but that's never really clarified at any given point. As hinted at about a minute prior, the Scale Out leader doesn't exactly reach a happy end thanks to his plan going terribly, and him leaving Accelerator with a question and uncomfortable realization as he ends his own life. The leader, not Accelerator. Later that night, Accelerator comes across Makoto's mom as she makes a pass at him. Okay, child nudity for the sake of comedy, not my thing, but I'm willing to let it slide. Other attempts at jokes in the series, some work, some don't. I'm not here to judge, at least in that aspect. An adult woman making a pass at teenagers young enough to be her own child. No. Nope. No. No. If it doesn't have anything to say about adult predators, then the series shouldn't have included it. Look, Style turned out to be 14. I'm not really going to make any judgment when it comes to character ages until I get some concrete dates or information. Moving past that, Accelerator decides to disobey his superiors for the first time as he steps in to save Makoto's life, despite him and Skill Out both being hired to eliminate her thanks to her own movement to remove the kids from Academy City, given the prospect of war being on the horizon. Toma's involvement in this incident comes from, which, technically speaking, is only possible thanks to Makoto and Makoto's mother and Toma. You know what? No, don't even want to acknowledge it. Toma just shows up.
Reason to want to help out a friend?
He's lucky enough to arrive just before the gang members do any lasting damage to her, which seems rather unlikely. Now, sure, I haven't technically been a part of a gang, but when it comes to the basic idea of murder, specifically government-sanctioned murder, so you shouldn't be too worried about any law enforcement coming to stop you, there's about several different expedient and efficient ways to do it that doesn't involve you all standing around looking like this is a game of capture the flag. Again, this is all just speaking from a hypothetical scenario since I have not officially been a part of any gang nor murders. Instead, they go about one of the more inefficient ways to kill someone, with them not even bothering to have someone constantly pointing a gun at the back of their head, so that way if someone does appear to save her, they can quickly get the job done. Some of this could be explained by their leader recently dying, so they're not exactly organized at this moment. Other parts could be chalked up to them being unsure about murdering what looks to be... I'm going to go with middle age, despite that not being what the series intended, but, you know, agree to disagree in the comments. Woman who looks to be simply wanting to protect her child. However, when it gets to the point that the current leader confronts Toma without his gun, despite the fact that Toma technically did not take the gun away, or as far as we can tell, make it inoperable in any fashion, it starts to come across like the plot's twisting and bending just to make sure Makoto's mother doesn't even wind up with a noticeable injury, let alone actually dead by the end of these 2 episodes. Moving past that, Toma and the Skill Out leader face off, wherein said new Skill Out leader divulges his reason for why they're doing middle-aged woman murder. Okay, when I decided to cover this series, I knew there would be about 3 or 4 scenes I would have to go into far greater depth than I did anything else I've discussed. Not because it was unbearably awful, or because they had such complex writing behind them that it would require me to dedicate a significant amount of video just to simply break it down and make it comprehensible for anyone viewing it, but instead because the decisions made in it from a writing standpoint, and I guess technically somewhat from a character standpoint, are so mind-boggling, stupendously baffling that I knew for a fact they needed significant focus placed upon. Quick disclaimer, I won't be getting into the particular details or even the nature of systemic discrimination, primarily because this video, if anyone ever watches it, likely is going to draw up enough contentious disagreements based on what I'm saying over a fictional series, so I don't really need this channel to become a hotbed of political disagreement when it comes to anything I say in regards to real life issues such as discrimination. All I will say is that how you behave as an individual has little to no bearing on how whatever group you belong to is viewed as a whole. That's not to excuse poor behavior by any person of any background, but it is a childishly naive sentiment to believe that a person is being judged only because of their actions, if not largely because of their actions. Furthermore, the fact that this substitute leader has to genuinely take a moment to really consider the last time he's helped someone for a selfless reason or even asked for help is not only incredibly unbelievable, but even if it were true, in no way supports Toma's asinine point. Now, I don't have a problem with Toma having this view in and of itself, and I would also argue it's a good thing because, as Mr. Alusher said himself, him and this guy aren't the same. We know Toma comes from a loving family. They're likely fairly well off considering how blasé they were over a new house they purchased being destroyed. And Toma has a unique ability even amongst the higher level espers, which makes him an incredibly valuable asset to the chairman of the entire city. Well, it's true that Toma doesn't remember or know most of this. That doesn't change the fact that his life experience is going to be greatly different from the blonde person. Also, please don't be that guy who takes the joke seriously and think I don't know what his name is. So I would very much applaud the series for having this 15-year-old believably not really be particularly knowledgeable when it comes to why people commit certain crimes given their social background, and spout something that sounds like it's straight out of a PSA.
We'll get it together, Grouch. Get a job, Grouch.
What has me holding my head in confusion is the fact that the story doesn't treat this like the empty ramblings of a know-nothing teenager. Instead, or when it instead has the more painful examples of the straw man antagonist situation, as the leader gives the same dumbfounded look that all of them do when Toma points out something that's so blatantly obvious. Of course they would have thought of it before this moment. Also, in regards to what I said earlier on, when I say someone's a straw man antagonist, I mean there's someone presented with a particular ideology that Toma needs to disprove, but rather than having it be portrayed in a, if not nuanced, then at the very least layered fashion that requires both Toma and the audience to really take the time to carefully take apart why exactly what they're doing is incorrect, it just gives the most shallow rendition of this particular, of whatever take they have imaginable, so that Toma can quickly dismiss it and we can all agree along with him, even when the reasoning behind it sounds just as bad as whatever awful mentality they're supposed to represent. It also detracts from what I would say makes Toma a interesting character. Whereas unlike your average protagonist who normally starts out in a more self-serving place before learning to act more for the benefit of others, him being self-serving pretty much involves him acting for the benefit of others. So instead, his main fault when it comes to how he involves himself in other people's problems stems from his limited knowledge of any given situation, as well as his limited ability to help. So his journey would involve him learning exactly where he can help and where it's best to just leave this to the more experienced people. Be it situations wherein he can't provide any assistance, or situations where his involvement would instead make the problem far worse than what it previously was. So when I see him essentially go, "The power of protagonist compels you," it just feels like all of that more fascinating aspects of his character were completely incidental, and instead I really should just look at him as your run-of-the-mill protagonist. More so at the time than today's current media sphere. Adding on to everything I just said, this also, going about it this way, ignores the two well-founded arguments against what Scale Out is doing. First, the moral argument, which is, can they really look back at the murder of this innocent woman and say that they're really proud that they made that decision? As even if they can rationalize it in the moment, it's going to be an action that carry with them for the rest of their lives. Or the more practical angle, which is the fact that if the Scale Out leader can recognize how quickly Academy City would be willing to turn on them, then they should also realize that simply playing into the stereotype that they're a bunch of vicious thugs who don't care about anyone but themselves is only going to keep them within their current situation and have them viewed as nothing more than disposable pawns to Academy City's controlling board members. Even if you wanted to go with a more generous interpretation of what Thomas said by viewing it as him suggesting that Level Zeros need to band together and properly change the system so that they can live better lives, that's still horribly naive of Toma, considering not only should he recognize just how deep systemic corruption could go given some of the adversaries he's faced, but he should also recognize that even if they're well-intentioned, said actions aren't necessarily going to lead to a better tomorrow for anyone involved. The best I can say for this entire resolution is that, frankly, I don't know what the future holds, or I don't know what the future holds. So for all I know, the story could go back and greatly criticize Toma for this particular take, and instead have this Scale Out leader, because let's be honest, it's pretty clear which character from this two-parter is going to be coming back, have a change of heart due to a completely different circumstance. If that does happen, I'll retract most of what I said, but until then, I'm just going to leave things with the unfortunate impression that the writer for this series comes from a very sheltered upbringing, which I wouldn't judge if not for the fact that they're trying to tackle something that's clearly out of their wheelhouse. All this wraps up by Toma going back to the place he belongs, Makoto's mother feeling comfortable leaving her daughter within the city now that she knows she has friends like Toma, and Accelerator's teammates taking an interest in his more rebellious attitude and wanting to work alongside him, not just for the official missions, but also to be rest assured that Academy City won't just use them as morally bankrupt tools for their own nefarious endeavors. As an epilogue, these two episodes are significantly lacking, with them not really resolving older conflicts, but instead setting up new ones. Those new setups have the potential for engaging storytelling, and the other got an over 10-minute rant, so not exactly an overall positive experience. This season is an overall improvement over the first, with more details within episodes, if not arcs as a whole, to be discussed at greater length. Yes, that comes with more negativity being brought up, but also more positivity as well. Plus, there's a reason I didn't title this The Unrelenting Praise of a Certain Magical Index. Helping matters, not only is the previous season laying the groundwork that can be expanded upon within this season, but also it branching out from Toma's perspective as Accelerator starts taking up more of an active role leading his own storylines. While I find myself not enjoying any of the episodes found in this season the same way I did the first 6 episodes of Season 1, I still think they're around the same level of quality, and I'm pleasantly surprised by it happening more frequently throughout this batch of 24 episodes.